another very special episode of the TRC podcast. This is episode number 22, Phoenix/Finale. My name is Jake. I'm your host, and with me is my friend and co-host, Ryan of RJM Analytics. And after some time away dealing with some personal things, our third Beatle, Adam, is with us to wrap up the season, and making his second appearance is David. We're happy to have you guys here with us to add flavor to the discussion. There's also a chance we might hear from Jack or Jimmy Fan later on, but I kind of doubt it. We'll see. If he has time to jump in and make some comments, he will. And if not, well, that's all right too. But anyways, we all know the drill. Yesterday was the end of a very long, hard, but entertaining season where we had, I think it was like, if you include non-points races, we raced 40 times in the span of 41 weeks. Just a grinder of a schedule, but it was fun and it was entertaining. It finally came to a wrap yesterday at Phoenix with all three series with the championship weekend. We're not really going to talk much about the Xfinity thing for obvious kind of reasons for anybody that knows, which we'll also touch on a bit. We'll talk a little bit of trucks at the end, but Cup is obviously the focus. And we'll talk about the season as a whole and give kind of a rundown of the statistics and the analytics and all that later. But first, we'll just kind of touch on the race itself. Kind of like a lot of the playoffs themselves, the race was pretty humdrum, other than a couple little things that happened. There's not really that much to say outside of what pertains to the championship, other than Logano pretty much dominated. What parts he didn't dominate, Blaney dominated. They combined to lead 299 out of 312 laps. There were only really a couple of little parts during the race where it looked like anyone might challenge them. And there's not really much other to say than it was a dominant performance by Penske on a track that they've been good at recently. And whatever our feelings may be on Joey Logano, he performed when it mattered. That was one of the most clutch performances of his career. There was one little incident, of course, that happened with Chase and Ross Chastain that was unfortunate. I would chalk it down to mostly being a racing incident. But again, we'll get into that later. But for now, I'll just turn it over to my colleagues. We'll start with Ryan. And what do you got to say, guys?
I thought, I guess, I called it, didn't I? The Logano winning and then winning the title. So, even though I would have rather my guy won, I can't be too mad about that. And with the end of the day, the way the metrics came out, it was basically a dead heat between Chase, Logano, and Blaney at the top for TDR, which obviously Chase getting wrecked had something to do with that. But, you can't win them all. And, Logano had a really good season, and he earned it. So, I guess about the race itself, it was a little bit on the boring side, but what I will say that I was happy with is that, unlike the past couple of years, it seemed like, the final four guys weren't just, in their own zip code. And there were portions of the race where it really looked like, Blaney or Chase Briscoe or somebody besides one of the final four guys could have legitimately won on merit. So, obviously, it ended up not turning out that way, and I think there's probably something to be said that maybe Blaney might have kind of held back a little bit at the end. But, it seemed like, I don't know if it was maybe the new car or it was just, the final four guys just didn't quite hit on the same setups or whatever it was, but it was nice to kind of not have that feeling of just inevitability where they all run 1, 2, 3, 4 the whole race.
Okay, Adam.
My impression is that it was another short track-ish style race for the Gen 7 car where it's pretty hard to pass and aero push is more important than it probably should be. there were only 3 on-track lead changes in this race. 2 by Logano, 1 by Blaney. And, it was just a Penske domination, and I don't think there was really any doubt that one of those 2 guys was going to win. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of refreshing to have a finale that's just straightforward and doesn't have any nonsense going on. I'm glad we didn't have a green light checkered. I'm glad we didn't have a caution in the middle of green flag pit stops. Like, it was a very fair race, even if not the most exciting. And so from that perspective, I'm good with it. And like Ryan said, I at first thought Logano winning the championship was kind of a joke, but then when you really dive into the numbers, he was probably the second best driver this season, maybe third or fourth at worst. And given the amount of parity we've had, I think that it's yes, Elliott was the best, but not by that much. And now that I have time to think about it, I'm all right with Logano winning the championship.
Okay, David.
Yeah, well, I was, out of everyone who was, on the server yesterday, surprisingly, I found myself in the position of pulling against someone harder than anyone else, which is very unusual for me. But I was pulling harder against Logano for winning the title, than anyone else, and it wasn't because of anything personal. I don't really have much against Logano as a person, but it was because, as the gentlemen know, I was leading for the entire season, pretty much, our predictions game, and one of our friend Alex was trailing me by a very small margin, and if Logano won the title, because that was his pick and not mine, he overtook me, and sure enough, that's what happened. But in spite of all that, Logano absolutely earned this title. Like, he 100%. It was and I can admit that. Again, nothing against him. He did a great job. He owned that race. I think when we start talking a little bit later about our superlatives of the season, I'm just going to say it. Like, I think this was the performance of the season. It maybe wasn't quite as dominant as say Larson at Homestead, but for being the situation that it was, this was basically just a complete humiliation of the other 3 contenders. I mean, I think I heard it cited at least once on the TV yesterday that there was only 1 green flag lap in which Logano was behind any of the other 4 contenders. Maybe I'm misciting that, but that was, that's just incredible. And he did a great job. And maybe even if Blaney was kind of running interference for him a little bit at the end, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I think Logano did a wonderful job. He will, despite maybe not being the best overall, I mean, that's really not what this format's about anymore. And so when it came right down to it, he just owned the race. And as for the racing itself, I think, yeah, maybe one of the downsides of this season is just how the Gen 7 has reacted to short track racing. But maybe it's a small price to pay for the vastly improved racing product that we've gotten on the intermediates and pretty much everywhere else. So, as far as I'm concerned, Phoenix was a decent, not spectacular, but a decent end to a spectacular season.
Yeah, for me, like I kind of hinted at, it was kind of a microcosm of what the playoffs had been, because I was actually looking it over, which, incidents themselves don't make races better or worse necessarily, but it can be an indicator. Apparently, there were only 5 incidents in the whole entirety of the playoffs to involve more than 2 cars, and only 1 that had more than 5, and that was the one incident we had at Talladega, which had 8 cars, and that was it. I mean, we had a bunch of cautions that were related to parts failures early in the chase, but otherwise, it was actually a pretty flowing and kind of humdrum playoffs if you just take all the other factors out of play, and it was that way again. There's really not a whole lot to say about the race. I mean, it was pretty self-explanatory. It was okay. It was better than the spring race was, just because you could do a little bit more passing and make up a bit more ground. There was a little bit more movement through the field, maybe not as much at the front, but which I attribute that to them getting rid of the stupid PJ1, or at least mostly getting rid of it. They completely got rid of it on one side of the racetrack and then moved it almost all the way up out of the groove in the other end of the racetrack. So that helped some. But it was okay. Not great, not bad. Just kind of eh. And, yeah, as far as Logano goes, he's never going to be one of my favorite drivers, but my kind of, distaste for him pretty much peaked, 6 or 7 years ago. I just don't really have that kind of animus towards him anymore, unless he's actually doing something like he did at Darlington with Byron. Really, other than that, there wasn't any big kind of douche moments from him this year. And look, was he the best throughout the season? No, but he performed when it mattered, and that's what this system is about. We've been over it. I don't know how many times. There's no new ways to say it, but this system is not about identifying who the best driver is over a course of a season or even over the course of the last 10 races. Really, it's just about timing your runs well and peaking at the right time and then doing well in one race. The playoffs themselves are not so hard to stomach, except for, and Adam would agree with me, and pretty much everyone else really here agrees with me, is the winner-take-all finale. Because pretty much it just boils everything down to one race. For these 4 drivers, the past 35 races really, literally do not matter. And that's the kind of situation you're faced with when you have this kind of format. We'll get into all that, the season-long stuff, later. And, who was best, who wasn't, who should be. But that's just the fact of life with this. And Merb kind of, not on the show with us today, but he kind of called it with saying that Logano was going to be a big favorite for Phoenix because Penske's been fast at this racetrack. And a lot of this talk that from Joey's camp about Phoenix wasn't really bluster. They really came out with a rocket ship. And, as far as what could have happened in the race, literally, like David was saying, there was only the one lap where Joey tried anybody from the Final Four, and we know what that was. We can go over the what-if scenarios from what might have happened if the 1 in the 9 incident hadn't occurred, but we also have to remember that even in that case, that situation only really developed because the 22 and the 1 apparently didn't get great fuel mileage. Well, the 9 didn't. Chase Elliott didn't either. But so it forced them into a situation where Chase Elliott pitted really early with, I think it was 25 or 30 laps to go in stage 2 to get fuel because they absolutely couldn't make it. Logano and Chastain managed to make it the whole stage and stretch it, but as a consequence of that, they had to wait on fuel for much longer and have longer pit stops, while Chase Elliott, who got himself back in the lead lap, was able to only take about 9 or 10 seconds on his pit stop, and so he came out right next to Joey on the restart. And then the ensuing sequence, he comes down, and we know what happens. I would mostly call it a racing incident, but even as a biased Chastain supporter, I'll admit that the first part of it was totally Elliott's fault. The rest of it was kind of Ross's fault for not backing off when he could have. But you also do have to take into consideration that, there was only about, I think, 60 laps left in the race at that point, and that very well could have been the last restart. And if he backed out, that would have cost him a bunch of time. So I don't totally blame him for that. More than anything, I blame the stupid dogleg at Phoenix for causing that situation. It was very unfortunate, and I hated that it happened that way. But again, it's a consequence of the system, and that's how you go. But I'm fine with Logano's championship. I would have really been fine with any result, to be honest. None of them would have been totally egregious, but I guess it was the second most fair, correct result for the season. So now I guess we can get into that talk about the metrics and the statistics or whatever.
I think just because you just basically had your long explanation on it, but it was really just a racing incident, the thing between Chase and Ross. And I mean, disappointing, but I guess I can't fault Ross too much for it. And I personally think, and I'd been kind of saying this earlier, I think Chase kind of didn't really have the right attitude throughout this whole playoffs.
I'll get to that in a minute. When I get to my next part, I'll bring that up. But yeah,
I think though throughout the playoffs, though, I mean, he wasn't running like he was all year, and he kind of just had this whole loser mentality almost. That was like, I guess, after the Roval, he got really snippy, and I don't know. I just, hopefully he comes back next year with a better attitude, because that was just, it felt like a lot of self-imposed errors, and it's like Logano peaked at the right time, and he just didn't.
He was definitely in a funk, and it's why I'm kind of. It's another reason why I'm fine with Logano's championship, and and Elliott, he'll get his. Like no one's doubting that.
Got his.
I mean, we're right, and he'll get his second. Really, like it's not. I mean, him and Logano we're former champions going into this, but Elliott's good for several more championships easily. And as as avid supporter of both drivers involved in that incident, I think really, when you have one driver who could have done something differently, and you have another driver who could have done something differently, I mean that's just the definition of a racing incident. And so that's all there is to it. I mean, it was really unfortunate that Chase got taken out, and especially when the car itself looked to hardly have a scratch on it. But that's just that's just a mechanic. It was
almost better. It was almost better, I think, that his car was clearly not running well after that for me, because otherwise I would have just been, holding out hope and on edge, and having that run go green as long as it did after that. I would have been trying to come up with all these, sorts of, well, if NASCAR doesn't throw a caution here, then nobody can ever again try to say that they rig things for Chase or whatnot. But I was glad I didn't have to worry about that.
It did clear up the championship picture very nicely. And then again, as for Logano, I mean, I've been thinking about this a little bit today, and if you discount the 2018 championship that he had, which was the year of the big three, of which he was the fourth, and then he ended up stealing their thunder. I mean, if you were to leaving that aside for a moment, this is one of those things that kind of it's a kind of a resume completer where this driver, whoever he may be, in this case Logano, where he has a career worthy of a title at some point, but then but whether or not the title that he actually got was he was the most deserving that season, that's another matter. But like the fact that he has a title is a good thing. You think of maybe like a Dale Jarrett type, right? In 1999 or Bobby Labonte, right? They certainly have Hall of Fame careers, and they only have the one title, but it's good that they have it. And same with Logano. I think he is a driver who's been around for a very, very long time at this point. Going on, actually, next year will be his 15th.
Crazy to think about.
Yeah. Next year will be his 15th full-time year in the Cup, and that's crazy.
I think for both of us, like basically started watching right around the time that he was like, greatest thing since sliced bread and all that.
Yeah. I remember. I remember that because I was all against him because he was like hot stuff, right? Everyone was talking about him, so I just naturally resented him. But and of course, he did kind of have that attitude early on, but having those years of mediocrity for JGR, and I think having a change of scenery with Penske and not being with the team that he came up through the ranks with, kind of reoriented him, and and of course he's had his incidents on the racetrack. They all have, but overall, I think I can't be mad. It's a good championship, and I think he's a good champion and a good representative of our sport.
Yeah, a few things on what you're saying, and then I'll
go first.
Yeah, and then I'll pass it to Adam. Is that first off to clear up on the little incident? Last I'll mention of it because I kind of find it kind of funny when they were like fishing afterwards for like their answer, and Chase just wouldn't answer the question, and then finally one guy in the presser just finally asked him, "Well, why didn't you just wreck him?" And then so he definitely dodged that one too. But I've not been able to confirm this, so I could be 100% wrong about this, but I think I read somewhere, somebody said that Eddie DeHaan, Chase's spotter, took responsibility for it, but I cannot confirm that. Yeah, as far as he goes, and we'll get again into his metrics and kind of how he did over the course of the season and why we kind of think he was the best. But I was going to say it first, but then Ryan said it before I could. But yes, I noticed like throughout, even going into yesterday through the last part of the season, that Chase, I mean, he's always kind of had this humdrum kind of somewhat of a downer personality, but it really seemed to be palpable the last few weeks with him, where he just seemed to have this kind of negative and pissy attitude, where he just kind of, it seems like the world was against him. Like immediately afterwards, the Ross move last week at Martinsville, for instance, like Alan Gustafson literally got pissed off about it because they apparently had lost him the owners' championship. He got very salty about it, and Chase himself just said, "I don't know whether to be happy about it or whether to be mad about it. I guess I'll just be pissed off because it suits me better." And then he didn't handle like the defeat yesterday badly, but it wasn't necessarily the classiest way either. But I don't really hold that against him because Lord knows I'm not the best of losers myself. But I'm not a big believer in like generally attitudes and the way that it affects drivers, because we've seen how negative Kyle Busch and people like him have been in the past and still managed to succeed. But I will say it didn't seem to do him any favors, and that's something that probably does need to change for him next year, and I think it will. But he pretty much said that he's not even thinking about next season at this point, that he's just going to take himself some siestas, and so I'm sure he'll be refreshed in time for next year. And as far as Joey goes, I didn't want to admit it or to myself or kind of really think about it, but he really, really seemed extraordinarily confident going into this weekend, kind of like as a counterpoint to Chase. And he's always kind of had that sort of like fake happy-go-lucky personality like on camera before, but something about it just seemed kind of more genuine this time. Like he really seemed excited and chomping at the bit for it. He was talking about how 2020 ate at him and how they thought they had the best car in that race, and then these cars started vibrating with 30 to go, which that was nothing but just an excuse or whatever. But however it happened, he used it as fuel or motivation for him, and he was saying that as much as he's ever going to admit, he kind of actually admitted that he made mistakes in his career and that the Kenseth thing in 2015 was one of them. He said that doing that now, he probably would have just recognized that he didn't need to win and Kenseth did, and he maybe wouldn't have pushed that so hard now. So, I mean, he's still going to do his shit on the racetrack sometimes, but I do think he tries to be more selective and smart about it now. And look, that was the best race of his career since probably at least Michigan 2019, because he's had this tendency for the last 5 or 6 years of his career where he'll be really fast early in a race when he's in clean air, but then as soon as he gets stuck back in the field even a little bit, he'll free fall. But he's actually had some races this year where he was up front and he stayed up front. And Ryan's metrics, I'm sure, will show that. So, again, over the aggregate of the season, probably wasn't the best, but he was up there in the top 3 probably, and so give it to Adam now.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Jake. I think that, as much as I don't like the playoff format, I do think we need to give a little bit extra weight to the playoff races. Not necessarily results, but how the drivers run, because, the teams aren't putting emphasis on the last 10 races. And, everybody's bringing their best stuff, in other words. So I think running better in those is probably a little bit more impressive than running better in the middle of the season. And, I mean, look, Logano, he ran really well in the playoffs for the most part and dominated the final race. And Chase was not as good in the playoffs. And, I think the difference in their regular seasons, while it was significant, is somewhat canceled out by Logano doing so much better when it really counted. And, as far as him being dependent on clean air, I mean, that has been a thing for him for a long time. This season, he just so happens to have his on-track lead change differential is 19 passes and 23 times passed, which is actually the worst differential in the series. I mean, it's only -4, so it's not that big a deal. But I think that speaks to the fact that Logano tends to do better as a front runner, and he's not necessarily going to come back from a lot of adversity within a race and drive through the pack. But, in this case, he didn't need to. And that's okay. There's more than one way to be successful in racing, and his way obviously works for him for the most part. And then also, I going back to what you were saying about, guys getting championships, even if it didn't come in the season that they were the best driver. Like, that's how I look at all this is, does the driver deserve a championship at any point in his career? And I think Logano, at this point, he's probably never been the best driver in a season, but he's been good enough for long enough and great at times that having a championship is perfectly okay. Having two, I don't really think he deserves two, frankly, but it's not the end of the world. And, I think, as much as Ryan will hate to hear this, I think Hamlin probably deserves one. I think.
Too bad he doesn't have one.
I know, right? And Harvick probably deserves 3. But, I'm not, as I've talked about many times on here, I just don't evaluate drivers by their championships and by their points finishes. I just don't think it's the right way to do it.
And
so,
that's something
I
that we
have
actually... Go ahead.
I think you kind of have to treat championships in that regard the same way that, I have with XDW, is Joey Logano was at the top score in 6 races this year, but that doesn't necessarily mean he deserved to win 6 times. His XDW was a little bit underneath 3. So I think you kind of have to treat championships the same way. I mean, I don't have a metric for that, but, I don't think Logano would ever be my pick for the best driver in any particular season, but just kind of, if you just accumulate all the seasons that he's been a contender, I would say that probably his career at this point comes out to he deserves at least 1 championship. Probably not 2, but, 1. And I think, like you said, 2018 was, he earned it under the rules, but shouldn't have really been there to begin with. This year, though, you can't really complain about it. So, yeah, I guess it's good that he has kind of a legitimate championship now. And, you can't just say, oh, well, his only title was 2018 when he didn't deserve to be there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, the thing about it is that over the aggregate sum of the season, I would say Chase was at the end just slightly better than everybody else. But really, there's so little in it to choose really for the top 15. We're really splitting hairs through so much of the field here. and it just really kind of depends on what you're looking for. Like, the only things I can really definitively say about the season are that Ross was the best at the beginning of the year, Chase was the best in the middle, and I really don't even know at the end, because the really strange thing about this is that no one really had a great playoffs this year. Nobody. I mean, everyone had at least 2 or 3 semi-duds. Like, even Logano had a very mediocre first half of the Chase. I mean, he was like 15th to 18th, I think, in like, what was it, 3 or 4 of the first 6 races before he had his Vegas win. And Chase had some duds too. He had the Vegas race and some other races where he had bad luck, but also a couple where he kind of backslid and, didn't finish that well. And, and Ross, maybe, I guess you could say maybe he had the best, but not because it was great, just because maybe wasn't as mediocre as the others. Like, talking about the top guys and what you expect them to do, it wasn't very high quality. And so it's really, really hard to define and quantify a season like this. Like I was saying last week, you can. It's kind of like 2002 in a different way. You just can't treat this like any other season. The things that normally make sense when you look at the statistics, the analytics, the metrics, or even just the eye test that you see in a normal season, the trends you see, just none of them apply this year. Like, this truly is a season unlike anything we've ever seen before. Yesterday confirmed what was likely going to happen, but it did happen, that for only the 3rd time in NASCAR history, with one of them being the very first season in 1949, and the first time in modern history, no one reached 1,000 laps led. No one even reached 900 laps led. Chase led the way with 867. Logano was just behind with 784. And that was it. Chastain led the way with 21 top 10s, which that's the lowest total that anyone has ever had in the modern era for most top 10s. No one had more than 14 top 5s, which was Ross. Chase had 5 wins, the most. Only 4 of them were on the road. One was the Pocono disqualification. That's amazing. 19 different winners. I mean, there's just so many different ways that you can talk about how insane of a season that this was. But, I mean, you could make theoretical cases for, really 3rd through 10th almost being totally interchangeable. And it's just really something to think about. But the last thing I wanted to say about that is just to show you how crazy it was and how kind of jumbled up the thing was in the Chase. I did go back and calculate. Now, we all know that Chase won the full season standings by a good margin. I think it was like a 1.5 race deficit that he had over, I think it was Blaney. But under the previous Chase system that we had before this, 2011 to 2013, where he had the 12 drivers and no resets within the Chase or winner-take-all finale, just 10 races after a reset, William Byron, despite having only one top 5 in the last 10 races, won the championship by 13 points, which is basically 13 positions over Denny Hamlin. Chase finished 8th. Chastain finished 5th. And Logano finished 3rd. That's insane to think about. I mean, obviously, that's a bit of revisionist history. Things wouldn't have necessarily happened exactly the same had everyone known that. But still, that's just bonkers to think about. And so it's really fun and tricky to kind of go through all that this year, but that's what the statisticians are here for. And so I guess if Ryan wants to, he can get into the full rundown of the analytics or whatever.
Just while you were just talking about that right now, I calculated who had the highest TDR during the playoffs, and it was Hamlin. Followed by Logano and Blaney and Ross, and then Byron. Really just. I mean, there were very small margins between all of them. Nobody was above 150, which, I mean, I've done a lot of these past seasons. This is easily going to be the first time that's ever happened. And even for the playoffs, Hamlin was, let me check it again, 158.23. So really throughout the whole season. I mean, other than Chase's run during the summer, nobody really had a stretch all year where they were just dominant for, sustained races at a time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I
Where
mean,
did where did Bell finish in the playoffs for TDR?
I forgot about him. He looks like behind Hamlin, Logano, Blaney. Was he ahead of Ross? He was ahead of Ross.
Really? That surprises me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ahead of Byron as well.
Okay. Yeah, Byron had a really
Larson was actually in there.
Playoffs. Yeah.
Larson was actually in there in fourth, behind Hamlin, Logano, Blaney, which mostly, though, was because of Homestead, where he had the highest score anybody had all season. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because, my perception was that Bell didn't really deserve to be in the Final Four. I mean, he obviously had the 2 clutch wins in the elimination races, although the Roval was aided by a bunch of nonsense. But he also ran kind of in several of the playoff races. And, he wasn't really a top 5 driver at any point this season.
Bell has made me look bad enough this year. I'm just going to get the 5th on him. Anyway, we got Jack here just stopping by for a couple minutes.
Yep, I am online. Good to go here.
You been hearing the show?
Hey.
Or?
What was that?
You been hearing the show so far? Do you know the context? Or
right now we're just kind of wrapping up the. We haven't gotten into the superlatives yet, but.
I do want to be over the superlatives. That's going to be definitely want to be a part of that. But I'm definitely just kind of catch on here. But I kind of got online, came back from my basketball game, so definitely just catch on here and there's some stats stuff going on right now. So gotta keep my eyes peeled on that.
Having a big old party on the TRC podcast.
Yeah, look, 7 of us in here.
That's a lot.
Five on the show and then 2 listeners. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
I make some. Yeah, I was thinking about this, but we're talking about Larson at Homestead. I mean, it's sort of a little off topic, but when I see that race and see how he just kind of ran general that day, it was really mirrored like that power run that Truex had 3 years back on his 1.5 miles, where he would just come out there, lead 200, 250 laps at Chicago or Las Vegas. Yeah, Las Vegas. I guess yes, place like that, and just come out there and crush the whole field. And it really reminded me of that. We really haven't seen that. Even last year in the 1.5 miles, like we saw a couple of those Larson runs, but this year was the only real power run I think we saw.
Only twice all season anybody had TDR score above 300, and only one of them was a win, and that was Larson. Hamlin at Martinsville, actually, just a couple weeks ago, was the other one.
Bad.
Yeah, and Jimmy, or Jack, so just to back up what you're saying, there were only 2 races this year where somebody led 60% of the laps, and they were Larson at Homestead.
Chase at the Road America was the other one.
Actually, Logano at Phoenix.
Yeah. Just yesterday.
Yeah, he dominated.
Yeah, Chase led 50. Chase led 58% at Road America. And then that's it. And then Truex led 58% at New Hampshire. But other than that, it's just been hardly anybody even leading half the race. And Byron led 53% in the first Martinsville.
Which is it's just kind of an insane stat when you consider the last couple of years where you can have these guys that come out here in a given race.
I think Larson last year alone probably had 5 or 6 races like that at least.
Oh, he did. Yeah, there were.
Texas.
He had. Let me check how many plus 300 scores he had last year. 1,
I'm gonna say
2, 3, 1 400.
Charlotte.
Nashville, he somehow.
600.
Nashville, he got like nearly a 450, just insane.
Holy Nikes. 450.
He had 4 300 plus scores last year, which is twice as many as anybody had all of this year.
Yeah,
It's
I was gonna
insane.
say, yeah, this
Atlanta,
year.
where he choked
Crazy,
Blaney,
yeah.
and Sonoma, Nashville, and Texas in the fall. So
Oh yeah, Texas, he was strong.
Yeah.
Phoenix, I guess. I guess Phoenix was pretty competitive. Because I think Truex led in that race. Truex kind of the main guy in that first, if I remember correctly. I guess it makes sense.
even
I was
last
just
year, it
thinking
was like
of-
the only other ones last year were Truex at Darlington and Kurt Busch at Atlanta, actually. So
Yeah, this
Yeah.
season.
Oh,
it
that's
goes to
right.
show how kind of hard those are to come by. But even by
What was,
those standards, I mean, yeah.
You know, has
With
there
Larson, yeah.
ever been back-to-back seasons where we go from having like no parity with like the dominant driver to extreme parity one season later? Like I can't remember that ever happening.
Maybe
2005
closest thing would
actually,
probably
I'd
be
kinda say,
1987 to 1988.
2005.
Probably the closest thing.
2005 to 2006, I think.
Oh, okay, that's true. Although I don't think
Stewart
Stewart was.
only won
Yeah.
5 times in 2005, but that is actually still mainly because his teammates were washed up Bobby Labonte and Jason Leffler, but that's
Right,
the
Jason
highest
Leffler
scoring
in the
season
Cardinals.
I've recorded so far.
Higher than
still.
Larson last year?
Yes, higher than Larson.
Wow.
Yes.
Ow.
Okay.
I mean, Larson had arguably some of the fastest equipment, not to take away from his season, but arguably some of the fastest equipment we've seen in the modern era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2006, after Stewart did that, the leading score was Jimmy Johnson at just a 177 on the season, which is really not that high, and just to show how even this year that would have cleared the field by nearly 30. So.
And
Yeah,
I think
this.
the 2005 to 6 thing is actually kind of more remarkable than this because that was the same car both seasons. So there's no real reason for the parity to suddenly increase like that in 06, but
Well, it was
it
more of
did.
just kind of a reversion to the mean after one guy was just so dominant the year
That's
before.
true.
And then even besides him, Roush as a whole team was just so
Oh,
dominant.
gosh, yeah.
So
Had
2006 then had 5 guys within 10 TDR points of each other: Johnson, Stewart, Kenseth, Dale Jr., and Kane.
yeah.
All
And
right there.
that actually I think is a big factor in the parity this year is that there was no one dominant team. I mean, if you ask me right now who was the best team this year, I would have to think about it because I don't really know. I mean, it could be Hendrick, could be Gibbs. I mean, it's hard to really say.
I would say
I'd say
Trackhouse
Hendrick.
just because kind of
Or that's true.
nobody really expected Ross or Suarez to be anywhere near that good.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I still think both of them are very good drivers, especially Ross. But I mean, I kind of think both of them maybe aren't quite as good as they looked this year because of how fast those cars were. But there's obviously still room for both of them to progress. Should we at this point just kind of get into our superlatives for the year?
Well, just one last thing I did want to say.
Fun fact: if anyone's interested, this is for people who remember. I had to look this up, so no one looked this up. But it blew my mind when I looked it up just now. But does anyone remember who the first multi-race winner was this year?
Byron.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we had 7 different winners in the first 7 races, and then Byron won his second at Martinsville after winning at Atlanta. And then he didn't win for the rest of the year, which is crazy to me. Yeah. And
actually, kind of a fun fact there. Ever since I adjusted the formula, the first 8 races this year now ended up coming out with 4 different drivers won twice in those 8 races. Truex, Blaney, Ross, and Byron all had 2 wins in that stretch, and then by the end of the year, 15 different drivers had won.
And to contrast that, the first 9 races had different TNLs, which is terminal natural leader. So that kind of speaks to the parity we had, especially early in the season when it just seemed like every race was a complete mystery and teams were still figuring out the car. I don't know that we'll ever have, well, not ever, but streaks like that are few and far between.
Yeah, just a few last things I wanted to touch on before we get into the superlatives. A few notes. Yeah, there was really only 2 races during the entire season where we saw one driver more or less just crush the field and finish off the job. And they were both at the end, really, Larson at Homestead and Logano this year. Now, hopefully that's not indicative of a trend that might continue into next year. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But yeah, and other notes I wanted to add. The one other big statistic I kind of wanted to bring up just to show you kind of how crazy this year was, and like I said, I think the Chase was slightly best overall, but if you want to like make kind of an argument for, the other results being reasonable, really kind of impressive statistic that I found out earlier today. I did some digging on Racing Reference. From just Sonoma through Pocono, races 16 through 21, we all know that amazing run Chase had of the 1-2, 1-2, so on stretch in the summer. He was 14-0 cumulatively against his teammates, 14-0, completely sweeped them. The rest of the season, all the other races, he was 18-32, 18 wins, 32 losses. And Chase is an elite driver, and he was literally right with Larson for the best overall record this year. That's how crazy the parity was this year. And the last note I kind of want to add before we move on is we didn't really touch much on is Blaney. He did end up second in the overall points, I think, according to Racing Reference. And had he not kind of made the back-to-back mistakes and errors that he did at Vegas and Homestead, he would have been in the Final Four, and who knows, maybe he would have not been kind of restricted in protect mode, where he was kind of just fighting for Joey and actually racing at the end.
Could have pulled a Daniel Hemrick from last year easily.
Yeah.
But, I think he could have just passed him straight up there at the end. He seemed a lot quicker. He drove right up to Logano, and it seemed like he was, if that was any other race, he would have passed him. But, obviously team orders, and, knowing it's on the line beyond yourself, I think was part of it. I think, he could easily gotten around him, but you're very well
him,
that...
Maybe not so much team orders, it's just not wanting to really push the issue.
Right, yeah. Like, just knowing that it could cost Penske a title. Cost the team a title.
Chastain was coming on pretty hard at the end. Like, like, if he'd had 10 more laps, he might have, well, maybe 20, but, like, he was coming. And if Blaney had raced him hard, it might have been game over. So...
Yeah, at the end of the race there, I don't think his car was actually as good as him. I think he was just kind of willing himself to get that close. But in either case, I don't think he would have been able to get by them anyways. But I just wanted to kind of add that because Blaney, he has a right to be, disappointed and all that. He can be pretty negative too, but I understand it because he deserved to have a win this year and he didn't. He did technically win Texas, that joke of an all-star race, but did get a points win. But I figured, regardless of kind of my own feelings about him, that he needed to get some love here, so I brought him up. But now we can move on to our superlatives, and let's just dive into it.
So, first one, I guess, when you guys can lead off, I had this list earlier, but race of the year. So, who was the lead off?
We'll do them like one at a time.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Brian, you made the lead off.
Yeah, the best race of the year was, I guess I'll go. I'm kind of biased here, but I'll say Dover. I just, guess some other people are going to give their opinions, and on one certain race that had great first 99% of it and then devolved into a shit show. But I thought Dover, even despite Chase winning, was just kind of everything you could ask for in a race, had lots of comers and goers and different strategies, and everybody was able to move around a lot, and maybe just kind of not really having great expectations for Dover after the past couple of years. Just thought that was a really great race. That'll be my pick there.
Well, I'll go a little bit different than what we were talking about earlier. I'm going to say Fontana because
that was a solid race.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Like, going into the season, we had no idea how the Gen 7 car was going to race on intermediates, and that was the biggest fear, is that it was going to flop on intermediates like previous cars did. So to get to the second race of the season and for that car to put on an amazing show at Fontana and have, talk about comers and goers. I think 30 different cars ran in the top 10 on merit at some point in that race. And, guys could drive through the field back and forth. There was passing everywhere. There were 5 different groups. We had an exciting finish. It was really just, I think it alleviated a lot of people's fears of what might happen with this car on intermediates. And combine that with the old pavement at Fontana. And it was just, it was a crazy race without being a complete shit show. There were a lot of cautions, but it was really just unpredictability from the first lap to the last lap. And, a number of intermediates were like that this year, but Fontana's the one that sticks in my mind.
Nice. I guess I'll go ahead here. I think people are going to say you're crazy when you say this, but doing it. And I'm going to say Martinsville too. It may not have necessarily been the best on paper, but the thing was that last 50 laps of that race was probably some of the most intense, I think, just as fans even watching, we've experienced all year. The race for the cutoff, it was literally changing lap by lap in those even last 10 laps with, Hamlin moving past guys, and obviously, which will be discussed later on, the Hail Melon, as we want to call it. But, even in general, I think you look at the first Martinsville race, I think a lot of people came into that weekend not really expecting much, I would say. It was like, I don't know. It could be a really rough weekend, but, there's a lot of vintage Martinsville I saw in that race, which is really cool to see. And, sometimes that 10% of that race where you're just on your edge of your seat and what's going to happen next and really kind of put it over the top. And, I think it's also recency bias involved. But I would say all those things kind of put it over the top. Racing as a whole was good. It was really good, I'd say. But, those last few laps and saw all the swings we had, I'm looking like, maybe Mobell's going to be out now because of that thing, and looks like Briscoe's going to be in. Then Bell takes the lead. Bell's going to be in. Hamlin's going to be in, and then obviously last turn Chastain gets in. We had so many different swings or emotions there that looking back at it was awesome. We really haven't even experienced something like that all year, and this year has been a unique and parody. So I'd probably say Martinsville 2 is going to be my kind of hardcore special pick here.
Is David still with us?
Yeah, I'm still thinking. I'm just, man, I have such trouble doing something like this because at some point all the races just kind of run together in my memory. But, there's races that kind of stick out to me. Like, I was kind of looking back through some of the comments on the server, and I think I remember saying the Texas race, not the All-Star race, obviously, but the second one was kind of a fiasco, but it was enjoyable. There's that one. I could also just be biased and say that I enjoyed the race the most that I was actually fortunate enough to attend this year, which was the race in Michigan, which wasn't anything special racing wise, but it's always an experience to be actually at the track. So.
That was the best Michigan race in a long time. Yeah. Legit. For the first time since God knows when. Guys could run side by side without that much aero issue, and we haven't seen that since probably the Gen 4. So
yeah, there was some really good on track battles for Michigan. So. I'll just go full on bias and say Michigan just because I was there, and it was a good race. So,
well, that leaves me, and I'm surprised a lot that nobody brought up the kind of elephant in the room of the discussion here. Which, well, first before I get to that, first I'll get to that in a second. But the race that technically ended up the highest in my rankings, I haven't gotten around to it. I'll list it on Twitter, I think, tomorrow when I get the chance. Of my ratings that I do from a scale of 1 to 10, which is tiered, more detail at the higher end. The race that ended up getting the highest under my kind of metric was the first Atlanta race. But first, before getting to that, I will say that my opinion, the Coke 600 was the best race of the season. The Coke 619.5 wasn't. It scored an 8. The Coke 600 got a 9.5. The Coke 619.5 got an 8. But it was just an amazing race. I mean, just for one thing, just the contrast of just what we had gotten so accustomed to seeing at Charlotte to this year, the turnaround was unbelievable. It had the most on-track lead changes at any intermediate race since 2011, I believe. And just the nonstop action from start to finish, storylines out the wazoo. It was just a fun, entertaining race. And to be honest, even though I enjoyed some of the races the rest of the season, it was kind of like the cutoff point for me to where I was still kind of feeling the high from the jolt of the early in the season. And then kind of after that, it still kind of somewhat went back to being the old grind for me after that, like it kind of always does in the summer. But that was a fun event. It's just a shame that it had to end the way it did. But really, it just depends on what you're looking for. I mean, I can see what Ryan's saying. If you're looking at the race that maybe outperformed expectations the most, it would maybe be Dover. I mean, Fontana had its merits for sure, because in the way that, when you saw that race, you knew that this was going to be a different type of year. Like, you just got a different special feeling about it when it was going on. But in the end, nothing really managed to have few enough flaws to really overtake Atlanta 1 for me. And the reason that race was so good, and why I had such a high view of it, was because I was so pleasantly surprised by it. I mean, we were all kind of, but especially me, were cynical about what this new Atlanta track would produce. That, a lot of us thought it would be a disaster, especially me, that, like, it might even be a safety hazard. Like, that front stretch to me just spelled disaster. That's having this new super speedway track that's got slightly less banking and is so narrow. Just seemed like it would be a recipe for, like, Daytona on steroids in a bad way. But, man, was I ever proven wrong. I mean, we had 46 total lead changes and, like, I think 34 of them on track, which up until the second Talladega race was the most for the season. Would have never thought something like that would be possible. And it was surprisingly not instant free, but fairly clean, and it didn't end really in a shit show. Wasn't the most satisfying ending, but you can't really ask for endings of super speedway races to be much more fair than that. There's not really a whole lot else for me to say other than it was quality, it was enjoyable, it exceeded my expectations by an incredible amount, and as far as races that actually didn't kind of get ruined by some factor, internal or external at the end, that was the gold standard of the season for me.
Yeah. Dare we propose a new category and say track of the year goes to New Atlanta? Because I gotta agree, those were both fantastic races. Like, I mean, it almost seems like a gimmick, right? Because it races exactly like a super speedway or like a drafting track, or Daytona and Talladega, but it's a smaller, tighter package, right? And so I think it really makes it makes it more I right? I still love Daytona and Talladega, like probably more than anyone else. But Atlanta is now right up there with as one of my favorites.
Yeah, I like the second race too, just not quite as much as the first.
Say Atlanta was going to be my honorable mention for favorite race. Both of them, both races, I liked them about equally. I think that it harkens back to super speedway racing kind of from the 90s, where you have you have a path, but there's room in between cars, and the best cars and drivers consistently are able to stay up front and not get shuffled. And you don't have these random runs where somebody comes from 20th to first to 2 laps. It's like it's more of a true chess game of skill, like methodically working your way through the draft up to the front, and then you can stay there if you're good. And and it's just I loved it. I loved every minute of both of those races, and I'm really glad that we have 2 of those races on the schedule. And I think with Daytona being such a circus right now, like Atlanta is a good antidote to that. And both of the Atlanta races, the best car won in each race. The guy who led the most laps won both races, and that's really cool to see at a super speedway.
Yeah, and the best part about it was that it breathed new life into a track that had gotten completely stale and just had no buzz around it, and it just worked and coincided perfectly with this kind of new effort that they're doing to put into around the Atlanta area in general, the city, but also the track. And it was not that long ago that this track was almost on life support. Like, it lost one of its dates to Kentucky, and there were rumors that it wasn't even going to be on the schedule at all just a few years ago. And now, I mean, it's thriving, and it's really nice to see.
Yeah, it's definitely right.
Let's move on to now. I guess our next one would be finish of the year. I guess I'll start out and nominate Austin Coda for that. I guess just because it was kind of like, you had Chastain going for his first career win. Just that whole last restart battle with him and Allmendinger and Bowman was just. I think if it had happened later in the season, it would have been kind of like, just typical Ross, pissing everybody off. But I thought that incident was really just hard racing for the win, and Allmendinger knocked him out of the way first. So it was, just kind of, it didn't bother me that much. Didn't really bother any of us at the time. So I think a first-time winner combined with just that type of finish, that was really cool.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to get in front of the pack here and say Bristol Dirt, because I know a lot of guys are thinking it, because that was, that it's in terms of just absolute, eventful, right? You had 2 young guys and wrecking each other and paving the way for a veteran of our sport, basically, to get now what turned out to be his only win of the season, and it turned out to be
Gibbs.
Right, last one of Gibbs, and as it happened, it did kind of change a little bit the landscape of the playoffs, because that if Busch doesn't get that win, he's out, right? So, and not that he ended up factoring much anyway, but yeah, Bristol Dirt's going to be one of them for sure.
Yeah, so Jimmy sort of alluded to this earlier, but mine was going to be the second Martinsville race. And I know it wasn't like a last lap pass or anything, but the last run was so insane with everything going on with the playoff picture. And I really did not want Chase Briscoe to make the finale. So when he was out there on old tires leading, I was sweating. I was really nervous. I'm like, God, this guy is going to back his way into the Final Four through strategy. But, Bell made it through the pack, and with Bell and Larson bouncing off each other, and it was just complete lunacy. It reminded me a lot of the Bristol night race last year, where there were so many different things going on in the last few laps where it was hard to even keep track of it. So that would be my pick.
I'm going to go a little off the beaten path a little bit. I'm going to say the second Darlington race. Reason being that, it was lap opener, had all the crazy stuff there, having all these guys blowing engines, cars catching on fire, and kicking the ball near Eric Jones, who's, not in the chase, but he's been solid all year. And, Hamlin barreling down on him essentially in these last couple laps. I just the finish overall was awesome. You had all these guys coming and going all day. Jones powered his way to the front, and last few laps were very intense. I didn't know if Hamlin was going to do a video game in that last, like Larson did last year. I think overall that finish was really had you on the edge of your seat, like I said before, but turned out well. I think most people were happy with it, and I think it was kind of just a good cap off to what was a really good race, the whole. So I would actually say second to Arlington race just because of how it turned out, and it was a really good battle for the finish at the end there too.
Yeah. For me, first off, an honorable mention would go to one that I think a lot of people have forgotten about, which would be the first Las Vegas race. Just because that's one of the only times, especially on an intermediate track, I've ever seen a sequence where you just literally saw two drivers for the win actually manage to stay side by side without the other really getting an advantage over the course of a whole finishing sequence where Bowman just nicked Larson at the end. That was pretty amazing. But overall, for the season, I would have to concur with Ryan that the Coda finish was really something else. When I first watched that, for some reason, I remembered that Ross had, I don't know, about 6 or 7 car length lead, and then he made a mistake, and that allowed AJ to get into it. But no, when I actually went back and watched it recently, no, he didn't make a mistake. AJ was just that determined. Like, he was just willing himself to try to get that win. And he did. And, that whole sequence, it's really hard to describe. But, it looked like, he got into Ross, then Ross crossed him over, Ross crossed him over after AJ just about got by him, then AJ got into him, and then it looked like Bowman was going to steal another one, looked like he was going to win, and then Ross kind of gives AJ a little bit of a move, and then pretty much uses him as a bowling pin into Bowman and gets his first win, which, to be fair, if it hadn't been for his first win, I wouldn't have been as big of a fan of the move, even if it was, still kind of tit for tat. But I was okay with it because you got to do what you have to do to get your first win because that's the most difficult one to get. And that really capped off what was a pretty crazy. It was frustrating that the end of that race seemed to take like 3 hours just to run the last stage, but that made it all worth it. Just the whole last stage in general was crazy, but that was the perfect capper on it. And that was probably, for me personally, the most satisfying conclusion to a race for the season.
All right, what do we got next?
Performance of the year.
The best performance of the year. Go ahead and let someone else start with this one, I guess.
All right, I'll start. Going back to the Coke 600, to me, Larson, his performance in the Coca-Cola 600 was...
Oh, man, you stole my thunder.
Oh, well...
That's all
sorry.
right.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he, I think, went to the rear 5 different times from various issues, and despite that, he drove his way back towards the front every time, and he was leading with a few laps to go before Chase Briscoe happened. That was, I don't know, in all the years of watching NASCAR, I don't know that I've ever seen a driver come back from the rear that many times in one race, and, continue to do it successfully. So that was to me even more impressive than his domination at Homestead. So yeah, that's my choice.
Yeah, I guess Larson at Homestead is kind of the chalk pick here. So I won't overthink it. That's what I'll go with. But I guess I'm actually gonna kind of contradict a lot of what I've been saying all year, and I guess go with Christopher Bell at Martinsville as a shout out. Under those circumstances, and being sent back in traffic late in the race, and being able to make that all up at a track that's not easy to pass at. So, again, Larson, I guess, is my sort of most dominant pick. But yeah, I think under the most pressure, I would have to say Bell at Martinsville. And then Logano last week as well, which I'm sure is going to be mentioned.
Yeah, that was going to be my pick.
That was going to be my pick as well. I said this. I kind of tipped my hand earlier and the kind of the intro or the first part of this episode. And I was just saying, look, it was a pretty standard dominant performance, not as much as Carl Larson at Homestead, but in terms of doing exactly what he needed to do at the right time, you can't beat Logano yesterday. That he just completely put on a clinic, did exactly what he needed to do, even if he had maybe some help from the team, which maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He did. He started from the pole, led a bunch of laps, and closed it out strong. So, nothing too flashy, but he got it. He closed it out.
I'll get the little dark horse, another dark horse. I've been saying this all night, but I'll say it again. It's going to be early in the year, and it'll be Chase Briscoe at Phoenix. He led over 100 laps that race. Only won the race. No one really expected Chase Briscoe to be a big threat on a track, especially like Phoenix, that early in the year. And,
Merb
when
did,
he came
actually.
out there,
I specifically remember Merb calling that. Like, he said after, I guess, Reddick had his big Fontana run, and then Chastain at Vegas, and he's like, all right, this week it's going to be Chase Briscoe's turn to have some big breakout race. And
yeah, but I think that was just, that was Briscoe's first ever breakout race, really, in the Cup. And it was a win, and I think, and that I don't know how good, I think Stuart Haas was having another down year this year. But he came out there and had that second half, it seemed like one of the fastest cars, if not the fastest car in the field. Crew capitalized, and they had to overcome that last second restart. And restarts at Phoenix could be chaotic. You can easily get shuffled out there, but I would have to say that. I'm gonna say Briscoe at Phoenix. So.
Yeah, I'll still mention the Larson thing, even though Adam mostly went over it there. Like, that was kind of like a supersized version of the Alex Bowman run at the 2019 Roval, where he made it, I think, through the field like 3 times when he was sick, and to make it into the next round. That was like a supersized version of that. That would have been, zero doubts, the greatest win of his career so far. But as Adam said, Chase Briscoe happened, which I had forgotten, actually. He already took out Daniel Suarez in that race, so that was a particularly efficient event for him. But being that Adam already said that, I'll go with a second pick, kind of. Austin Dillon at the Daytona 400. I'm kidding. No, obviously not. It was impressive. Yeah, you could say that it was impressive how he did it, but still, no, he can't pick something like that. No, as my alternate, I'm going to go with a bit of a homer pick here, which this could also, if we were doing like negatives, which we aren't, but if we were going to do it and we had a biggest heartbreak category, it would be my boy Corey LaJoie at Atlanta. For him to do what he did in that race, in that absolute shitbox of a car, to lead basically most of the last green flag run, which I think lasted 60 or 70 laps, or maybe it wasn't 60 or 70 straight laps, but most of that run really didn't do anything wrong at the end. There's just nothing he could really do against the speed and the cleverness of Chase at the end. The incident there just, was kind of just a racing incident. He did all he could. I know that he can rub people the wrong way sometimes. I have no qualms with saying it. I know he can be a pompous horse's ass like his good friend Bubba, but I like the old cuss. He's my favorite driver, and it hurt to see it go down that way, but man, was it a thrill seeing him take that bright number 7 Rays Energy car to the front and get that close to what would have been legitimately the biggest real upset that wasn't just a fluke like Chris Buescher or Justin Haley in I don't know how long.
Yeah.
You sure this is the joy in the phone?
Oh, okay.
I was just gonna say, like, my honorable mention that I'm surprised nobody brought up is Reddick at Road America getting his first win, out-dueling Chase Elliott, the best road course driver of this era. And that was the day when it was notoriously hard to pass, and he put on a clinic against Elliott and then drove away from him. And that was one of the most impressive first wins that I can remember. And I think, I think we all knew Reddick was going to be great, but that sort of cemented it for sure. And I think, he's going to have a lot more runs like that in the future.
Yeah, I just didn't think of that. I mean, it was up there, obviously. I just didn't think of it because that was such a boring race otherwise. That was the one thing that made it worthwhile, but it's definitely up there.
If there's actually any Reddick win, I think deserves consideration for this. I would say Texas, just with coming back from what he came back from there. On that note, we now have the moment of the year.
Yeah, and for this, there's a special rule for this
one.
We all have to choose a different one.
know what the moment of the year is.
Yeah.
But since that's too obvious, I'm just going to say, I think the amount of first-time winners we had this year is really great, and in particular, Daniel Suarez getting a win. The fact that his career was basically dead in the water just 2 years ago, and to have this opportunity, Brett Moffitt backs into the bushes with Trackhouse, and for it to turn out that way, and to finally, prove so many people wrong, that was really great. And then I also wanted to bring up now, in hindsight, it's even more special, but Kurt Busch's last win. Almost certainly his last win, but whole scene on pit road after that, it just really cemented this whole transformation of his whole narrative surrounding him, and so that was really cool to see. And that was also the first win for 2311. First full race win for them.
Yeah. And
I always forget that Bubba win last year even happened.
Yeah.
I guess
yeah. For me, since I'm the closest thing that comes to being like a Chastain stand on here, I'll be the one to do the honors on that.
I take objection to that.
What now? You've made out like you don't even really like him this year. Now you're suddenly, come on, man.
Bro, I was on his train a long time ago.
Oh, David, I get your voices mixed up.
He's picked him like every single week in the playoffs.
For some reason, I thought you were Jimmy. Your voices are actually kind of similar, and so the voices in my head, they're all kind of getting jumbled now. So I apologize.
Anyway, proceed. We'll let that aside for now.
Well, okay.
I guess I'll say.
I'll let you have the honors then. So I'll pick something else. I'll just kind of. Well, no, I can't because he already said
more than one person can pick the same thing. We realize.
Yeah, I was gonna say it.
I mean, everyone's already picked a different one, but everyone's already picked the same one. It's kind of just if you weren't to pick.
Yeah, well, I was gonna second.
For this category in particular, we're basically all just kind of picking for second place behind. The Martinsville Miracle.
Yeah. Well. I'll let David do the honors on Chastain then, and I'm going to have to pick something else besides Candace, because that's the one I was going to say for the other one.
I'm not going to pick a Chastain moment, so you can have it.
Well, all right, then I'll go ahead then. You could have had it if you wanted to, but so I mean, there's not really a whole lot to add other than what's already been said in the last week and a half, but just it was an encapsulation of everything that I like about Ross, what can also sometimes be bad about him. I am glad, maybe the best part of it is that I can finally say for once in my life that wasn't a total bandwagoner, that I actually liked Ross before. It was cool to like him before all these new fans that aren't really fans that just are here because they saw it on YouTube or Twitter or whatever. But, all of the wrong that he'd done through the season and everything that led up to it, all the crap, whether it was caused by him or others or whatever, as Kyle Petty kind of put it, it all was washed away in that moment. Like that, for better or for worse, that's going to be his legacy from now on. And in a way, it's kind of unfortunate because that's all he's going to be known for no matter what he accomplishes, like I think I said last week. But on the other hand, I mean, what a moment to be known for. And it's just the perfect way because, I mean, this man, not to sound, go the whole cornball route, but he really, outside of Alex Bowman, is really the only other guy that's really in a top ride now that just had to struggle and fight for everything for years and years and years. I mean, this guy's been in the National Touring Series since 2011, and for 9 of those seasons, he just was in shit in the Cup Series and just had to claw for everything. And it's a miracle. His career was basically done after the DC Solar little fiasco that there was.
Oh, yeah.
But he got a reprieve and really a 1 in a million shot. And he's taken advantage of it, and kind of in a similar way to Bowman, he seems to do his best when people are counting him out, when people don't believe him anymore. Like, even I've kind of said that he's not as good as I want him to be, and we've all kind of had our go-rounds with that, with not thinking he was really that great. But just when he's down and he's out is when he comes up with his best stuff, and that's what he did at Martinsville. I prefer to call it the miracle at Martinsville because I don't really like watermelons. To me, they're the most overrated fruit in existence. The most overrated fruit in existence, one of the most overrated foods in existence. But
the sheer number of highlight videos that I found, of reactions and compilations and edits of Chastain's wall ride, and you guys saw, I linked a bunch of them in the server. They were. I spent the next day, 2 days really, just rewatching that a million different ways, and it was probably I have so much joy thinking about it even now because it was such a fantastic move.
Well, I did too, and my favorite one was the one with those frat boys, those bunch of idiots that were talking about, including that one in particular, that one. The guy that said literally, fuck Ross Chastain, and then literally the second after he does that is when Ross just turns on the turbo boost and rides around the wall, and it does it, and then he spends the whole rest of the 15 minutes after that calling him like a dumb fucking autistic retard, and just keeps saying it's bullshit, that's cheating, they shouldn't let him get away with it. And even though those other guys were pretty idiotic too, finally one guy at the end just called him out and said, you would have loved it. You just don't. If it was anybody else, you just don't like Ross Chastain. So that was classic.
Imagine being that guy who, after a moment like that, is trying to disregard it and trying to say it shouldn't have happened. It's like being the kid who asks for extra homework at school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that there were not one but 2 different videos of these people on Discord watching this, live, and then in two different cases, someone said wall ride right before Chastain rode the wall, and they people think alike, I guess, and they just and then it's they called it and it happened and it was wonderful, but I especially love the Freebird edits that there's been.
I haven't seen those. I got to get to that.
Of someone editing the guitar solo of Freebird onto Chastain's wall ride. It was it's like chef's kiss. It's so good.
Yeah, but
so nothing will ever touch the Titanic music meme.
But yeah, just to finish off. I'll add one. Yeah, just to finish off. But yeah, it encapsulates everything that I love. About Ross, for better or worse, he's the most exciting driver there is in the circuit today. People compare him to Ernie Irvan, and there's some valid comparisons there, but I'm Ernie Irvan would not have tried that. No, he would not have done that. He wouldn't have gone that far. This guy, it was. I don't think it was really until that. I mean, we knew a lot of it, but it wasn't until we actually saw that I think that we truly knew the full extent of just the psychosis that this guy has, and he will do anything to win, and he really is.
I mean, it reminds you of those ESPN commercials he had in 2012. Remember that? And they did the most absurd things. And I think somebody might have been one of the
walking Casey Kane in a porta potty.
The porcupine.
Those ones.
Yeah. There was one of Kyle Busch, I think, and it was it was something you would see in that, except it actually happened, and we actually saw it. Somebody try it and pull it off, which I think was It's almost the most insane part.
But yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
The
Ross.
difference between Ernie Irvan and Ross Chastain is that Ernie Irvan, he was merely reckless, right, up to a certain point. Ross Chastain is just straight up deranged. I mean, complete and total Florida man energy right there. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny when you need him.
Serial killer Ross.
Saw out boys.
Yeah, but
I guess he'll kind of go with another.
Yeah, he's the closest thing we have to a modern day Rocky Balboa in racing, and that's why I love him. So I'll now finally pass on to the next guy.
Well,
Yeah.
well, okay. I mean, there's no way to really follow up all that, but I mean, I was gonna say the Kurt Busch thing, like Ryan said, and the reaction on pit road. If that being his last win, probably that's an amazing end to his career. But just a little bit more on the Ross thing. I think it's the way that move touched the entire, it crossed over into mainstream media, and people who don't even care about racing were talking about it and getting interested in it, and it just, we haven't had a moment like that was positive in so many years.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. But
No, go ahead.
It's all good. But...
Okay, yeah, but I mean that's the thing. It's like normally the only time NASCAR makes national news is when something bad happens, and it's like this was a real great moment that had everyone talking about it, and that I think that in and of itself is almost more important than the actual move, and then it sort of brought NASCAR to the forefront of public consciousness again, and that was really awesome to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yep. Yeah, I'll kind of go off on the another kind of quiet. I mean, you can't like Bob Chastain, but for me, when you finally pick, a guy as a favorite driver, it's been a while since having to pick up their Jimmy, but you finally get Reddick in there, and he finally gets his first win, and outdueling Chase Elliott at a track that, I mean, all stats considered, he's the only Cup guy who's ever won there. It was only the second race there, but just seeing him finally get his first win after a lot of close calls, especially what happened with the old dirt race, and still spinning out and almost still winning the race. It was cool to see him finally get over the top and get that, kind of get that monkey off his back and finally get that first win. Seemed like it was a long time coming, and we were all just kind of expecting it, but you really didn't know when it was going to actually happen. So for me, I would say it'd be Reddick finally getting that first win at Road America, outdueling Chase, who's the best guy on the road courses.
I guess before we move on to the next one, there is one other wild card I'd like to throw in there, something that wasn't even in a Cup race, but our main man, Parker Kligerman, winning at Mid-Ohio, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Legend.
that's good.
That has to just get a shout out.
Give him a full-time ride.
Yeah. He's got one now. He's going to be in that machine car in Xfinity next year.
Yeah.
Nice.
Excited for that.
I know, that's awesome. All right.
So before we move on, since Jake and I ended up basically picking the same thing anyway, and hand in hand jumping headlong into that madness, I will let you know my second pick, because I've been thinking about this for a while now. Namely, having the first 4 races of the playoff being won by drivers who are not in contention.
That's
right. So the first three races, the first round was completely swept by drivers who didn't make the cut at all, and then Tyler Reddick gets eliminated from in the first cut, and then he wins at Texas. And so, I mean, and then the second half was a little bit more conventional. But, we still have Kyle Larson winning at Homestead when he's not in contention anymore. But I will say this, out of all of those, if I were to pick a singular moment, how about the 43's 200th win at Darlington, of all places?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I forgot about that part.
That's kind of Eric Jones' vindication after all he's been through. And sure, I mean, Christopher Bell's kind of outshined him now just because of the sheer number of wins that he's had. But Eric Jones, it's really great to see him, win that race. And I thought that was a really cool moment at the time.
Yeah. I guess I'll tee off on that in that case as we toward our next.
One last honorable mention I want to say.
Okay.
Just one last thing. I know you'll appreciate this. I just thought about it. I'm not even talking about when it happened. I'm talking about afterwards. My favorite moment, other favorite moment of the year, was Kyle Petty going off on Denny Hamlin after Denny Hamlin was disqualified from Pocono and then sent that little video on Twitter where he very softly opened the cork on the champagne and poured it next to his now worthless trophy. That was my other honorable mention. But yeah, go ahead now.
Yeah.
I believe I didn't even mention that. Anyway, yeah. Our next category here is the biggest breakout driver of the year. And, yeah, since we were just talking about him, I think this might be a bit of a surprise pick, considering guys like Reddick and Chastain, who got their first wins and multiple wins. But I'm going to say Eric Jones, just because of the fact that nobody was really expecting that kind of season from him, I think. Been kind of written off by a lot of people. And actually, in my metrics, he obviously I would not say he had a better season than guys like Tyler Reddick, but he ended up a little bit better than him. Ended up in 9th place. Most of that, as we've been over, is because he had a really bad teammate. The second worst rated driver in the entire field actually was Ty Dillon, but I just think that was the type of kind of career resurrecting season from Jones, and I think better season performance wise, considering his equipment, than anything he ever did at Gibbs. So he's going to be my pick there. Obviously, a lot to choose from though.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of go with another one that's what do we call it? One maybe not thinking of the Chastains, the Reddicks, but I'm going to say Chase Briscoe. I've been talking all about Briscoe so far, but not only did he have that rather dominant win at Phoenix, but he legitimately worked his way into the round of 8 and was straight up was very close to getting into the round of 4, where we saw him yesterday at Phoenix had a very decent chance at winning the race, which I know wouldn't have gone over well with some people, but I didn't expect Briscoe to win this year. I really didn't expect him to even be a playoff contender. I expected maybe 18th, 19th in the points. Maybe if he win the first, win the skies out. But, I did not expect him to have a race, not even at Phoenix where he won, but also he had Charlotte and the dirt race where he spun himself out trying to get the win, but was very close to effectively winning both of those races. Says a lot. And, he had several solid runs in the playoffs too, which, I think no part of me had Briscoe anywhere near the round of 8. Yet alone, the round of 4, which he came very close to making. I'll let somebody else obviously get the honors for the other guys, but I'm going to say Briscoe in that regard.
The only part
he really exceeded my expectations.
The only part about him, I would like to see him do well and continue to do well. My only part that concerns me about him is that it seems like he doesn't really get held accountable for all the stuff he causes, which is numerous. With Ross, he caused a lot of stuff, but he gets called out on it. It gets a lot of attention, but somehow Briscoe seems to go under the radar with it. And so I feel like if he's not getting that attention, he might continue to do that stuff. But he's a fun guy to watch, and I would like to continue to see him do well.
It feels like he's the hardest driver maybe besides Alex Bowman, the hardest driver in the field to really get a gauge on right now, just because of how inconsistent he is. Next year, I could see him being a fringe Final Four contender, or I could see him not even making the playoffs. So we'll have to see about that.
Yeah, it's crazy how many races Briscoe had where he completely didn't show up this year, but then he had a number, where he legitimately ran in the top 5, and then combine that with his Jekyll and Hyde driving style, where he'll just make ridiculous moves that have no chance of working. And it's I really don't know what to make of the guy. It's you could say he was, I don't know, as high as the 12th best driver this season, or you could say he was as low as the 18th best driver. It's and it obviously depends on how good SHR is going forward, but yeah, I don't know what to make of him. I guess my breakout guy, I mean, I don't know if it's counts as a breakout, but I'll say Chris Buescher for the fact that he had, several races, especially the road courses, where he was really legitimately fast and, ran in the top 3 to 5 on speed, and then, finally winning his first real race at the Bristol Night Race. Other than last year with that, or 2021 with that random Homestead race where he ran up front for half of it, he hasn't really shown anything. But this year he had those races where he showed something. And, I don't think he's ever going to be a championship caliber driver, but I do think he has the potential to be, a perennial playoff driver, maybe fringe top 10. And that's better than I would have expected from him.
Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna do it. I let Jake speak first on the moment of the year. So I'm going to get out there and say my piece first for breakout of the year. I mean, honestly, it's kind of obvious to me, but I just have to go with Chastain because it might prove to be more of a product of Trackhouse's newfound speed than anything, but it's just astounding to me. As someone mentioned, after his career being pretty much dead in the water after the DC Solar thing, and he comes back and has one of the best seasons I've ever seen. Just from last year, he was running the 42 for Ganassi, right? And it was just kind of a pedestrian season. I don't really remember much about it. But then this year he comes out of the blue, and he was strong right out of the gate. And I remember saying very, very early on, which is why I want to say this before Jake, right? Because I always remember saying very early on, how great of a season Ross Chastain was having. Because after finishing last at the Daytona 500, and then he had kind of a bad race at Fontana, and in races 3 through 6, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta, and Austin, he had third, second, and the win. And then, he had another one a few races later at Talladega. And so he was a perfect example. I mean, it didn't end up mattering because of the playoff system, but he is a perfect example of how the point system just does not reward actual good performances, and it just punishes bad races more. And I made a point to say, after the Darlington race, that I'm just shocked that Ross Chastain has had the best season so far. And then I remember when you guys were talking about starting this podcast, I made sure very specifically to say that if you don't, I said, and I quote, I have the comment right in front of me. If you don't talk about how Ross Chastain is getting screwed over by the point system, then I definitely will if I'm ever on this thing. So that aside, he's been just sort of the revelation of the year to me, and time will tell ultimately if it holds and he can actually be a perennial contender year in, year out. Maybe not, but I think it shows a lot of promise, and it definitely is a bright future for Trackhouse if nothing else. So,
yeah, it does.
I
gotta say it. So
go ahead.
And I would say Chastain is the most obvious pick for breakout, but I knew you and Jake would go with him, so I wanted to go somewhere else. But my real answer is Chastain. So.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we know that. I mean, Chastain's the most chalk pick, and I already kind of waxed poetic about him anyway, so there wasn't really more that I could add on that. And now, obviously, Reddick had a really great year, but I almost feel like I can't fully call that a breakout because we kind of already seen what he's capable of before this year, because he was a back-to-back Xfinity champion, and even in 2021, we've seen more than a few flashes of what he was capable of. Last year was just this year just happened to be when it all came together. It wasn't really like a big surprise, honestly. So I'm going to go kind of in a similar vein as what David said, which Bubba's another good choice, but, unfortunately for him, he kind of, pissed away his goodwill that he had. near the end of the season, but he would be a pick. But the one I am going to pick is Daniel Suarez. Obviously, he didn't have the consistency that his teammate had, or wasn't maybe as spectacular, but for as much as he probably was elevated by his equipment, it was still very surprising to see what he put up, because generally, Sean, there's things that I kind of disagree with him on, but one thing that does seem to be something that he's pretty correct about is kind of what the 6-year rule, as I would call it, where drivers pretty much, after about 6 full-time seasons, you pretty much know what they are at that point, give or take, some external factors. Suarez is one of very, very few drivers that seems to have proven that wrong.
This was his 6th season.
Well, all right. Well, I just blew my whole thing then. But no. But seriously, in the first 5 seasons, we've seen flashes of him being decent, that he could be a okay driver, but we didn't really see anything like what we saw at Charlotte or Sonoma or some of the other races, especially that kind of April, May, June stretch that he had. We didn't really see any of this coming. He should have won the 600 probably before he got taken out by Briscoe. He had several other races where he was very strong, and then finally at Sonoma, it all came together. He was, again, wasn't spectacular, wasn't super consistent, but he did a very good job throughout the season. He's a very good personality that is good for the sport, helps the outreach from us internationally, and it was really nice to see him do well. And for me, it's just nice on a certain level to see, even though they aren't technically that entity anymore, it's really nice for me to see Trackhouse do well, because they still have some DEI blood coursing through their veins. For as shady of a character as he's been in the past, Ty Norris is obviously a man very high up in the ladder there. The one car that Ross Chastain runs is technically still a continuation of the one car that Steve Park ran, the original DEI car. And it's nice for me to see that on that level too. So, yeah, that's my pick for Breakout.
All right, I guess on the opposite end of the spectrum here, we have kind of the biggest driver who kind of underachieved relative to expectations this year.
Right,
and
I knew Jimmy would want to go first. Didn't win this race. Didn't win any races. I knew you wanted to go first. So.
I think a lot of us expected kind of some growing pains with him trying to be a owner driver, but I don't think anyone expected that. I guess he turned it around a little bit at the end of the season, but still, that was not pretty.
No.
I gotta go down that path and say the exact same thing. I didn't even expect him to make the playoffs. But if he told me, he'd get one top 5 the entire season, I wouldn't believe you. I think on top of that, not only was he largely invisible most races, he not only also had a 100-point penalty, he also got DQ'd from the race. Only guy that's due to do both. Congrats to him for that.
Ended up with a worse TDR than Michael McDowell.
I will say this: the last 10 races of the season versus the first 26 were really 2 different stories, I would say. I think in those last 10 races, he probably had more top 10s than he had the first 26. I guess there was some growth there, and I'll give some credit where credit's due there. But yeah, it was just, I just not expect to be that invisible the entire season. Besides when he's wrecking or getting 100-point penalties for other stuff. But that being said, I think there's going to be some improvement next year for that team.
Yeah, I actually do
I think as an organization as a whole,
based on how he finished this year. I'm kind of expecting a mild rebound from him. I'm not sure if he'll make the playoffs, but I think he'll run up front more at least.
I'll say, obviously,
he has a chance, I think.
Obviously, none of us expecting him to be this bad this year. I will say it was surprising to see him like fall ace, but I won't say I was shocked because, like Brian would tell you, or the other guys would tell you, I mean, there were already really signs that Brad was kind of fading hard even before this year. It just didn't. It didn't look that way because he managed to make the Final Four in 2020, kind of on the back of a few like really strong races, and just being a consistency bot. And then last year he already had a pretty big dip. And then this year just happened to be another big one, so it wasn't just shocking, even though it was a surprise that it was this bad.
Right. I kind of wonder, I kind of wonder what he was expecting when he made the decision to buy into Roush Fenway Racing, because, the last time this sort of thing happened, Tony Stewart wins a bunch of races and is a serious contender for the title, and then wins it a few years later. But Brad Keselowski was just like not even the poor man's version of that, but just like complete, just like broke versus woke, and that if you want to make a meme out of it, it was absolutely. I mean, again, it's been the statement's been made that he had a dip last year, and I remember that. Like he was already showing some signs of wear and tear last year, but I'm just utterly astounded at how sharp the drop into utter irrelevancy was this year. And he had maybe two races. Well, that's just it. He had two races where he led any meaningful amount of laps, and those being the Daytona 500 and the Bristol Night Race. Neither one of those ended up. I mean, I guess he got a top 10 at Daytona, but like his lone top 5 was Homestead, and that was a 5th place finish, right?
Yeah, and he kind of backed into that too. Right,
and I'm kind of at a loss to describe how much of a disappointment for me personally. I remember a few years ago when Brad Keselowski and Kyle Busch were kind of going at it on track. Back in the days of the White Deuce, right? White Miller Lite number 2 car. And I was thinking, could this be the next big rivalry, Brad Keselowski versus Kyle Busch? And boy, was I wrong, because not only did that not pan out, but Kyle Busch has just turned out to be, kind of a once in a generation type talent, even if he hasn't shown it so much the past few years. And Brad Keselowski is just kind of a pedestrian ever since his 2012 title.
Well, it was a rivalry, just a pretty one-sided one.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. That being said, if there's a candidate, which I know this is the category, for a guy to really kind of take a decent step forward next year, I think Brad's definitely right up there in the top, along with Busher. I think those are two guys. I think it's an organization as a whole that could, maybe not make the Trackhouse leap, but make a pretty significant leap and probably have at least one playoff car next year. And whether they win through a plate race or, just straight up winning the, a mile and a half, like a road course, Busher. I think they'll have and I kind of bullpen for next year is I think they will have a car in the playoffs next year. I just don't know who it's going to be, but I think there will be a RFK car in the playoffs. So I guess I'll add that.
All right, well, I will. My underachiever guy of the year will be Austin Dillon, and that is primarily, yes, look, Tyler Reddick is a great driver, okay? But Austin Dillon, he had like 2 or 3 great races this year. His win at Daytona does not count as one of them. And he was very mediocre for much of the season. And you know what? He backed his way. I think he was, at least by Ryan's metrics, he was the luckiest driver in the series.
Oh, yeah, he was.
Yeah, he backed his way into most of his top 10 and top 5 finishes. And you know what? He doesn't have it. He's a nepotism candidate. I mean, not candidate. He is a product of nepotism. And, I'm sick of the guy, personally. But, look, now, he's good enough to be in the Cup Series. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be there. But, he's like a 20th place driver at this point. And I think with how great his teammate did, it was a really poor season from him. And I'm not sure that... Yeah. Go ahead.
I've always kind of said that I think he gets kind of too much shit for, because he's related to the team owner when he's the last couple of years been like a solid 15th place driver. Then yeah, this year was just bad. I mean, straight up bad outside of like Martinsville and Homestead, and I think maybe it was Talladega. He ran pretty well. The first Talladega, I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely kind of expecting either one of two outcomes with him. With Kyle Busch being over there, is either that it kind of elevates him into this sort of like Clint Boyer type consistency robot when Boyer was at RCR, or he just continues to look really embarrassing to the point where it's like, 1 or 2 years from now, we're like, this guy even belonged there if Kyle Busch is just going to be running circles around him. So,
right. Well,
yeah.
and to put some numbers on that, I just checked, and he had only one race this entire season with a single-digit average running position, and that was the Martinsville Spring Race. So it's like he, even when he finished well, he didn't run that well, and yeah, like you said, like he was. I think he was an ascending driver the previous couple years. He's been, not great, but an above-average solid driver, and it's like I don't know what happened to him this year, but it makes me think that he. I don't know if he lost it or what, or if it's just a down year. But
it's kind of just like the most average driver in the field to me. It's like not even really relevant to bring up for something like this, but
no, that's fair. Okay, I think of like Eric Almirola as being like Mr. Average.
Okay, I think Almirola at this point is below average.
Think so? Yeah.
I mean. Yeah, I fully expect, assuming Cole Custer doesn't have the type of, 10 different -30 pass differential races because his crew keeps putting him in those situations. I think he's easily going to be the worst driver on that team at this point.
Yeah, that's probably right. I mean, honestly, there haven't really been like that many severe underachievers this year. I think just because of all the parity, like everybody got.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the point where there's only like maybe 3 or 4 drivers in Cup outside of the shit boxes at this point who it's like, these are definitively well below average drivers. And
yeah, and I think
most of those guys are rookies. Yeah. Like the only one this year who it's like, okay, why the hell is this guy in Cup was Ty Dillon to me. And
right. And I think
next year he's going to be in a ride that's probably much better suited for him.
Exactly. And we got to give these teams a lot of credit for finally streamlining their hiring practices and getting drivers in their cars that actually deserve to be there. Because it wasn't that many years ago that we had a good quarter to a third of the field that was just filled with
Casey Mears driving for Hendrick, J.J. Yeley driving for Gibbs.
David Reagan, Casey Mears.
Right, exactly. Or God, look at 2008 to me is the best example of just wasting rides with these horrible drivers.
Half of them were part of that whole open wheel crossover fad that
Yeah.
Who can forget the great Patrick Carpentier and Dario Franchitti?
Oh yeah, those legends.
Hey, that's pole winner Patrick Carpentier.
Oh yes, I knew that, but I don't care.
I don't care either.
Pole winner at Loudon,
Who can forget the Jacques Villeneuve full-time season attempt that lasted literally one race? No, actually one qualifying race.
Oh yes, I actually had not remembered that until you mentioned it, but yes. So I mean, here's the thing I'll say too is that even though we only have 31 non-shitbox cars in the field, we have more good drivers than we've had in a long time, and I think that has helped make parity more come to the forefront, and it's also just made the races better because we don't have a whole third of the field that's just hopeless because they suck, and that is hopefully will stay that way for years to come.
All right. Well, for my disappointment of the year, I mean, since there aren't really any other obvious choices besides Brad, which, I mean, I agree with the principle what Adam's saying, but it's hard for me to also really call Austin Dillon that much of a disappointment just because, he's at best a 15th place guy. I'm going to go a bit homer again and choose a team for most disappointing, and that would be Spire Motorsports.
Saw that coming.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, you can't really deny it. I don't think that,
No,
It's from them.
Yeah, this team, I'm tongue tied because it irritates me so much. There's really not much I can really say, other than, just what a bunch of just bullshit venture capitalist assholes, just hoodwinking. Haney from Green Acres, whatever you want to call it, just con man characters. These individuals really made it seem like they were going to be all in, and they had a high-tech operation that was going to compete at the top levels of NASCAR. In the past, they had testimonials from such people as Ty Norris before he moved over to Trackhouse, and Steve Letarte, who was a consultant, even backup crew chief for Corey LaJoie in a race in 2021. And, their plan was, after like a year of sucking, that they were going to concentrate on the Gen 7 car and, start the path to becoming a relevant team in the way that Colleague and Trackhouse and even in 23XI and even Petty GMS did. And that it was going to be the move, and that's the line that they gave Corey. He said he gave up potentially better offers to go there. And there's not much else other to say, but that all turned out to be a total lie. They were arguably even worse than they were in 2021 this year. It's just a shame. I mean, whatever you think of him, and I understand if anybody doesn't like him, it's just such a shame to see somebody like Corey LaJoie that is genuinely a top 20 at least, or maybe even top 15 talent, just have to waste year after year of his career, even if some of it was his own doing, in just a joke team like this. This team, it needs to die. It needs to go away. That they've wasted enough time and money and resources from this sport. They need to stop leeching charters and leeching off of other people. Get out of the sport. They made their money. They got everything that they need to be happy. They need to stop ruining things for everyone else. And that's all I got to say about it.
Well said.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess our only prompt left that we had was Driver of the Year, which we kind of went over at the start of all this. So, I don't know. What else is there to say?
So are you guys as kind of excited to have a break as I am? I mean, I love this season, but I'm also looking forward to having a few months away from racing. And
I think as, it used to be racing was basically my entire life, and I didn't really follow other sports that much other than my local teams, the Washington, whatever the hell they were called, throughout the years, and all the other teams. And now I'm more into NBA throughout the year, NFL. I have like all these fantasy leagues that I do, and college basketball, which I was able to really get into not just in March a couple of years ago because of all the analytics that they have over there. And it's now just kind of like refreshing to have this break from racing season where I can, focus more on that other stuff. And then by the time that's all starting to wrap up, racing season comes back around again. And so, yeah, it's like, I obviously looking forward to what next year has in store for us, but it's, it's not like I'm going to be miserable on Sundays without it.
Yeah. We're not doing the Grace Drivers. I forgot. I wasn't paying attention for a second. We're not doing the Grace Driver, or?
Because we kind of basically talked about that earlier already.
Yeah, I understand.
I think this season, I compared this. I made this comparison maybe a month ago, but this season is just like unto a great adrenaline rush that has lasted for 9 months. It has been one of the greatest experiences of my life. And even though I've only been able to watch, here and there, I mean, I've watched probably more races in this ring season than I probably ever have. But it just the atmosphere and the vibe that we've had just watching these races together. It's been truly a one of a kind experience. The number of winners that we've had this year was, the record books won't even be nice to it because it says 19 winners, but in truth we could have had at least 22, right? And that's just how it is. But of course, this is going to go down as tied with 2001 or 2011. But this year was nothing like those, and I was watching in 2011 at least. This year was just one of a kind. Really, it was a fever dream. And so, with that in mind, all good adrenaline rushes have to come to an end. And yeah, I mean, I do appreciate more and more these last few years just having those few months off. And I mean, I was on J Ski for a brief moment today, and I did see the countdown clock that he has, and only 89 days until the Busch Clash, right? So it's always a short off season, but when you're in the middle of it, it seems so long. And but I think this year will be nice to just kind of rest and maybe we'll get a little bit of a perspective into how the drivers feel, because the drivers certainly enjoy the time off, and I think it's going to be nice because there's a time for everything, and racing gets to have a longer time than most because we have it, from February through the first weekend in November, and then which is longer than most sports seasons, and but now it's time for us to take a break, and I think I can be fine with that. It's going to be fine to have a few more extra hours on Sunday, but you better believe when things start heating up again, I'm going to be looking forward to the Daytona 500 because I always do, because it's still in spite of all the stuff that's gone on with it in the past few years and throughout its entire history, it's still the great American race, and I can't wait. But yes, I will enjoy the off season.
Yeah, for me, I have very conflicted, kind of complicated feelings about this season. Like on one hand, objectively, racing quality wise, at least at its best, this certainly, especially on intermediate tracks, would qualify as possibly the best season that I've seen in my time watching live. There's not much else that really could compete with it. It didn't have the consistency of the 550 years, but it did have higher highs as far as quality races. I never thought, if you had told me a few years ago that we could have a Coke 600, the quality of that race that we saw at a track like that, I would not have. There's no way I would have believed it. Not a chance. Or have the competition like we had this year. I mean, this kind of parody, we thought that we would never, ever, ever see anything like the early 2000s again, that wasn't possible, that era was bygone, it was past, but here it happened. 19 different winners, no one reaching 1,000 laps led, almost unprecedented in the entire history of the sport. So on that level, it was great, and it was like a fever dream, So I enjoyed it, especially in the first third of the year. At the same time, results-wise, it was very frustrating for me because, I can't really complain because so many things went my way in 2021, and this was just kind of a regression to the mean, I guess you could say. But really, after Chastain's win in Talladega, it seemed like absolutely nothing went right for almost the whole rest of the year. And then finally, Larson had the Homestead win, and Ross had the moment at Martinsville, which kind of made it palatable. But really, and even at the end, seeing Ross come up just short and having, the little incident with Chase, which kind of put a damper on things, still kind of left me with this little bit of a bitter feeling. But, so right now I can't fully view the season in an objective light. because of that, because and all the stress, I said the 600 was the last race where I really felt that high, because after that, next week was Gateway when the whole Ross drama really began and kicked into high gear. And just as much as I kind of enjoyed some of the races the rest of the year, there was also kind of this pressure cooker feeling of just stress, or my stomach was just wound up every week. Like, what kind of drama, what kind of shenanigans are there going to be this week, even though I did still enjoy it. And I'll admit, for a lot of this season, but especially at the very end, I was just fried. And I do really need a break. And so I am relieved and glad that the season is over in a sense. But I also do know that in time, once everything's cooled down and we've moved on and, time kind of heals whatever grievances and wounds there might have been from this year, I'll be able to look back and really look on this season and appreciate it for what it was, which was an amazing one that we will probably never see the likes of again. And hopefully it'll be that way for the broader group of fans who, that may not be the most enlightened, but maybe the ones that, I'm not talking about the total idiots, but the ones that aren't completely just lost, too far gone to recognize that, I don't think they really appreciated what they saw this year, and they wanted to hate on a bunch of it because I guess they were so not used to it, and they just didn't know how to process what they were seeing. But I feel like, even though right now it's not been viewed in the best light, that the legacy of this season will be something that becomes more and more positive as time goes on. And years from now, it'll be viewed in the same light, I think, as the way that 2014 or seasons like that, the way that they are revered. That'll be the general feeling of it, that it'll take some time, but I feel like the years will be kind to this year, and that's how I feel about it.
Absolutely. I think, hands down, I think it's my favorite year in 15 or so years of watching NASCAR. We'll see how history treats it, but yeah, right now I would absolutely say my favorite year I've ever watched.
I would say same here.
I would say probably tied with 2001 for my favorite season. I think, like Jake was saying, that back then, 2001, I don't think I fully appreciated it at the time, how cool of a season that was, and I do now, and I think this year will be similar. I do appreciate this year already, but I think as time passes, and I think as, the following seasons will probably be more normal, for lack of a better word, I think we'll really have perspective on how crazy and unusual this season was. So, yeah, all we can do is just be thankful that we all got to witness this and, share the excitement together on this chat, which has made the season a lot more fun than it would have otherwise been. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I would be remiss, of course. We decided that we weren't really going to talk much, if at all, about Xfinity, because for those that may not have known, I'm sure just about everybody does, but just to kind of refresh everybody, Ty Gibbs did win the championship on Saturday in a late battle where he passed Justin Allgaier with 20 laps to go, and then held off Noah Gragson to win the championship. Obviously, with all the stuff that's been swirling around at the end of the season around him, and this whole kind of controversy and situation in general, obviously a lot of people were upset about it, including most of us, or at least not happy about it. But a thing to remember in moments like this, as difficult as it can be, is at the end of the day, this is just a game. This is a sport. Life is much bigger than any race that goes on. And unfortunately, the next day we got the news that a few hours after the result in the race, overnight, Coy Gibbs, the son of Joe Gibbs, owner of Joe Gibbs Racing, and the father of Ty Gibbs, passed away in his sleep at age 49, suddenly, without any warning. And it was just a tragedy. And, whatever you may feel, or we may feel, how we may feel about Ty Gibbs, or Gibbs in general, the Gibbs family in general, or the team, or whoever else might be connected with it, or competition. He's still a human being, and that's not something that anybody at that age should ever have to go through. It's a very difficult time for him and all those involved. We're thinking and praying for everyone, him and all the Gibbs family and everybody else that was affected by the situation. And so it didn't overshadow what happened Sunday. That would be the wrong way to say it, but it did kind of put a damper on things. Everybody kind of knew about it beforehand. And so, if you guys want to talk about the race, you can, but I'm not really going to say anything.
I didn't really have anything to say about Xfinity or trucks other than that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Zane Smith in the truck race, easily the most deserving champion there. And Braxton was probably the best Xfinity driver all year, but, I mean, how much he ran his mouth all week about Ty Gibbs and then losing to him, it's kind of like, I guess sort of like Truex a couple years ago with Logano, except even worse because that was just like one kind of heat of the moment comment.
And Truex was a champion anyway.
He ain't gonna win the damn war, and Braxton's just a little punk, and really hate to see it. I'll play him a song on the world's smallest violin. And then obviously, I mean, I'm not the biggest Ty Gibbs fan, but after what he had to go through, I mean, nobody should ever have to go through that. And I'm kind of glad in hindsight that he ended up winning the title.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah. It's even if it's kind of overshadowed, this young man should be celebrating right now, but it just was not to be, and but still, I mean, he does have that on his resume now, and nothing can replace the loss of a father, especially at that age. It's still when he's still a few years younger than I am, even, it's still in many ways an formative part of one's life, and that's where it's going to be hard on him for sure in the coming weeks, where he has to balance the responsibilities of being an Xfinity champion and starting to move up to Cup next year with grieving his father. And I think another particular person in the industry whose father died, right, Dale Jr., probably can offer him some counsel. And
same age as Dale Earnhardt was when he passed away too, 49.
Right, that's true. 49 years old, that's right. But this is going to be a time where his team can rally around him, and they can become stronger through this adversity, and he can persevere and become a stronger man for it. And we will continue to keep him in our prayers, and it's going to be tough. I can't, because I have no idea what the pain is like. But it's I can only imagine. But it's rough. But I'm glad that he did end up winning the title, and he does have that, and no one can take that away from him.
Anything you wanted to say about expand your trucks, Jack?
Not really. I think everything that's needed to be covered, I think, was covered by you guys. In hindsight, definitely kind of, I think, Gibbs is the most deserving. And hopefully, at some point, he can truly celebrate the accomplishment of winning that, because obviously now it's not going to be happening anytime soon. It kind of reminds me of when Waltrip won the Daytona 500, like you were saying, right after his Dale Sr. died. It was nothing really to celebrate at the time. I mean, in that moment, sure, but then a couple hours later,
well, at least Coy did get to celebrate with him.
Yeah,
that's very true.
The post stuff like that. But, yeah.
Anything
yes,
about you,
Adam?
Adam?
That's all I like to say with that.
Adam?
Adam's on mute right now.
No, I got nothing else.
All right. Well, before we wrap it up, anything else you guys wanted to cover? Miscellaneous, other things, or?
I don't think so.
We kind of.
I would just like to say that it's been a fun year, and we've already discussed that. But thanks for having me on. It's been a very fun episode, and
Oh yeah.
and it's going to go on.
I guess what I will add just is as far as our plans with the podcast, over the off season, I think we'll kind of definitely do like a preview thing next year at the start, and I don't know. We'll kind of take it by year, but maybe we could have like one sort of maybe around the holidays, kind of like a recap if there's any sort of news with silly season stuff. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to get into that in kind of my outro, but I'll just go ahead and say it now. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do for off-season content, if any. Well, probably if next year we'll do a preview. I'm going to tentatively plan for maybe doing it after the Clash, but I mean that's so long away now. I don't want to make anything definite. I don't know if I feel like it. Maybe I might do like a F1 mini show roundup with Charlie if he feels like it in a couple weeks, and then maybe if Sean or whether he wants to be on it or not, maybe we might do like a historical episode at some point, maybe during the off season. I don't know, but I'm not going to say anything we don't know anyways. And even if we did, I wouldn't want to spoil the surprise totally. So yeah, but I definitely echo what David said. I appreciate all you guys. I really want to make sure we empty the bucket here with our finale episode. So, you got anything else you guys want to say?
I don't think so.
Yep. It's been good. It's been fun. Thanks, gentlemen.
All right. What about you, Adam?
Yep. Hasta la vista, baby.
Here's to this year.
Yep.
Many more like it.
Cheers.
Yep. Cheers. All right, then. That does it for the 2022 season of the TRC podcast. Thank all of you listening. Our 26 subscribers strong, and I think we got over 1,500 views for our 22 episodes that we had, which started back in May after Darlington. And for all the I think we had 7 people on here total between us and Alex and Merb, who hosted the show for the first little bit. For all of us listening here or on YouTube, Spotify, whatever, thank you for all of your support. We need every bit we can get trying to grow this program's reach. Please like us on YouTube and Spotify. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TRCPodcast1. Follow Ryan at RJM Analytics. He just posted his full review of the 2022 season and his metric statistics in there, and he's got some other stuff from past seasons that he works on too, historical stuff. Be sure to check it out, stuff that we can't go into detail on the show about. He's got his whole list there. Don't be shy about leaving us a comment on YouTube. Tell us what you liked, what you think we could do better for next year maybe. Every bit of engagement helps. The TRC podcast is Ryan, co-host and head analyst statistician. Myself, Jake, co-host and producer. Thanks also to our third member, Adam, to Jack/Jimmy Fan for being with us today, and for David for being on with us here today. And even though they haven't been with us recently, Alex and Merb for helping to get this whole thing started. Until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you then.